So you guys already know I love doing these still worth it videos, and I love looking back at older technology and seeing which phones are the best and whatever. And I don't know why I'm sounding like this right now, but I've been doing so many Samsung Galaxy quick comparisons that we have to take it back to the roots and we have to figure out, is the LG G7 still worth it in 2020? Now, funny enough, I just purchased the LG G8 and I feel like the LG G9 is coming out very soon because this is around the same time it came out last year. So let's go ahead and do this updated review on the LG G7 and see how it still holds up in 2020. Now, I do want to say one thing. The LG G line means something special to me because I personally owned the LG G2 for like a year and a half, and I custom ROMmed it and I enjoyed it pretty well. I mean, I didn't really have any issues with it until that touch disease problem came, and then all those boot looping issues happened and all those different things for all those G phones after. But the LG G7 was a pretty decent phone all the way around, and I really did enjoy it for the most part. Looking on the front, you have a 6.1 inch IPS panel. It is a 1440p display, and this was the first time we saw LG use a notch on their display for their LG G line, and you can see that for the most part it still holds up quite well. You know, this is the type of format we have on pretty much every single other phone that's been out so far, so really not much has changed except, you know, for the Galaxy S20 lineup and even the S10s and all those different phones. Like, the bezels have gotten so much smaller, and even the G8 that had a notch on it, I wonder what the G9 is going to look like. But there's just so much, like, there's no hype for these phones anymore, which is so sad, and that's why the depreciation went down too. I mean, when this thing retailed, what was it retailing for? Like $899, $999, around that price tag. Now these things are selling for about $138 on Amazon, and this thing just came out in 2018. Like, it's not even that old, so it's pretty crazy that happened. And if you want to pick an LG G7 up on Amazon for that $138, I'll go and leave that link down. It'll be the first link down in the description. You can get it from there and help support the channel at the same time. This thing does have USB Type-C, which is really cool. On the back, you can see we have a dual camera setup with that fingerprint sensor, and I really do like that. And as I've stated before, as long as you about have like a dual camera setup in 2020, you'll be set. Like, you won't be like that behind in future updates and stuff, so I think you'll be set in terms of that. In terms of the way it feels in the hand, you know, it does still feel pretty premium because it does have that glass back, which is really nice. That glass back really did help it out quite a bit, and this thing does have a micro SD card slot, which is really awesome. I love seeing that in phones, and the more phones that bring SD cards are awesome. I thought the S20 was going to get rid of the micro SD card slot, but thank God Samsung didn't do that. They pulled a really good move by allowing us to keep that in that phone. This phone also has IP68 dust and water resistance, so you can go up to 1.5 meters of water for 30 minutes, and that's a super awesome thing that even if you look at the newer phones, they all still have IP68 dust and water resistance. So even though this phone is 2 years old, it's still kind of maintaining itself in terms of the hardware, which is really nice. And anytime we get phones that can handle themselves in terms of the hardware and everything, that really does mean a lot in the long run. So that really pretty much covers it up in terms of the hardware. I'm talking about the software. This thing was released with Android Oreo, so 8.0. You are able to upgrade it to Android 9.0 on Pi, and I think it's probably going to get like another software update on top of that, but I'm not really like 100% too certain. It's like 50-50 as of this point. If I had to say it, I would probably see it like, yeah, it's probably going to get Android Q, and maybe there's already been an update or announcement by LG by the time you're watching this. Like, maybe they already said they were going to update it, but as far as I know, I haven't been able to find anything. But at the same time, because the hardware is so capable and the price tag is so low, I would almost kind of recommend buying it and then just custom ROMing it and going from there. I mean, I'm sure there's custom ROMs out for this thing, so even though stock software support is a little iffy, even when I owned my LG G2, that thing was already outdated by the time I bought it, and it was only like a year or two old at that point. With the Android phones, especially these ones, the software updates are one of the biggest problems, and with LG, I don't really think they fixed it, and that's one of the biggest problems with LG is the software. If they just went and focused on the software, I'm sure they would sell more phones. As I've stated before, you know, there's a lot of phone manufacturers out there that put skins on their phones and everything, and you don't really hear about them. However, the really major ones that keep mostly stock Android, like the Pixel line or even the OnePlus line, even One UI, even though that's kind of like, it's definitely a step in the right direction with One UI. It's still not perfect, but they at least got some things right. So LG just needs to fix their software, make it more minimalistic. Hopefully they can bring back their like Nexus 4, Nexus 5 UI. That'd be really cool. But regardless, it is what it is, and in terms of software, that pretty much covers it. Now, hitting on the performance, this thing has a Qualcomm Snapdragon 845 chipset, an octa-core CPU, an Adreno 630 GPU, and there were two different models of the LG G7, the 64GB model and the 128GB model. That base model, the 64GB model, has 4GB of RAM. That top tier model has 6GB of RAM. In my specific model, I did have the 4GB of RAM option. Now, in that base model, it really wasn't that bad of a performing device. It was actually pretty very fast. Really, whatever I did with it, it handled it perfectly fine. Whenever I opened apps, closed apps, whatever, like it was there for the most part when I needed it. But maybe the only times I did see it lag behind was loading apps in the background and keeping apps in the background. When you go and you have, a phone in 2020 and it only has 4 gigabytes of RAM, but you have all these huge apps, apps are only getting bigger and bigger. And because of that, these phones need to have more and more RAM in them and more power in order to suffice, you know what I mean? If you pick up a phone from 2011 with like 1 gigabyte of RAM or half a gigabyte of RAM, that was capable at that time, but over time that actually turns out not to be the case. And the same thing with the LG G7. Back in 2018, bro, even in 2018, there were already phones with like 6 or 8 gigabytes of RAM. So it's very confusing that they did something like this. So it's not the end of the world, but it is very weird that that was the case. So in terms of the G7's performance, I'll definitely say it's on the up and up. Like, it's on the better side of things, but it definitely could have been better. If you get that top tier model, the 6 gigabyte of RAM option, that actually might do you better in the long run. It's still not going to be perfect, and it's not going to be the best performing phone ever, but for the time being, that'll probably do you better than a lot of other phones that are coming out right now with 4 gigabytes of RAM too. And if you're going to spend $138 on it, I mean, if you're getting it from Amazon, that's really not that big of a price tag. I've seen a ton of phones from Best Buy and all these other phone manufacturers that are like $200, $300, and those are supposed to be budget phones, but they're really not quite budget like. They're very, very weird. They might have like a cool thing going for them, but in terms of the internals, like, they're really not that good if I'm being honest. So the G7, I think performance wise is in the middle. It's fast, it's not that smooth, and in terms of the RAM management, it definitely needs a lot of work. And in 2020, like, I just don't know how much longer this phone can last based on the circumstances that we have on it currently. So I think that really pretty much covers it up there. Now, hitting on the camera, this thing does have a dual camera setup on the back, 2 16 megapixel sensors, a standard lens, and then an ultra wide lens. And I think this is probably the biggest highlight of this phone. You're able to shoot 4K at 60 frames per second, which is really cool. And that front camera is 8 megapixels, so it's a 1080p at 60 frames, which is awesome. But that back camera, like I said, I think it's the biggest highlight. The camera quality on this phone is very, very good. I found very few problems with this. I'm gonna say very so many times. Maybe the only issue is the camera UI and maybe the lack of like a telephoto lens or something. But as I've stated before, as in 2020, as long as you have at least a dual camera setup, you're pretty much good for the next year or two. As you've seen with the Galaxy S20s and hopefully with the iPhone 12s, they're going to be bringing so many camera sensors into their phones that if you have a phone with a single camera setup, you're pretty much already outdated, because that's like the older design. It's kind of like having like a home button on the front of your phone. It's like the same type of thing. You have an older design. When you have a phone that has multiple camera sensors, you're actually doing yourself a favor, because not only in terms of the hardware that's increased, but also it just looks better and it feels better in the hand. So this kind of goes along with featureability of the phone. It's not always about how it looks, but also the functionality behind it. And for this camera to even have 2 camera sensors, that's really cool, and I really do like that. So in terms of the camera, I definitely give this one a thumbs up. Now, ending it off with the battery life, this thing does have a 3000 mAh battery, and this is probably the most average thing about this phone. It's very, it's not like amazing battery life, but it's also not a horrible battery life. As we've seen with so many phones coming out now, they've increased their battery lives quite a bit, including their battery sizes. So this phone is kind of in the middle in terms of the battery life, and also it's been out for a couple years, 2 years at that, so it's probably going to be down in the degradation battery. So the battery's probably degraded a little bit. Not a big deal, but it is what it is. So I can definitely tell you in terms of the battery life, I'll say it's good enough for the time being. It's not the best, and especially in 2020 when we have phones with like 4000 or 5000 mAh batteries, this thing will definitely look like it's not the best thing in the world, but it's not the best thing in the world, and it wasn't trying to be the best battery life. But I'll definitely say the battery life is probably the most average thing about this phone for sure. Now, one thing I really liked about this phone, I'll definitely tell you, was the screen. For an IPS panel, it was actually not a bad screen at all. They did a really, really good job with the screen. I thought the first time I opened it that it was OLED, but then I took a closer look and I found out it wasn't. And that's one of the coolest things about it. And I like IPS, but I like OLED more now. But IPS is still good enough, you don't get burned as badly on those IPS panels, and it still feels like a very good phone. It still has a bit going for it. And to kind of answer the question, is the LG G7 still worth it in 2020? I'll say yeah, man. I think the LG G7 is still worth it in 2020, mostly because of that price tag. That price tag, if it was like $500, I'd say no. But because this thing is selling for like less than $200, like, that's a pretty hard bargain not to get. You're getting a very great build quality. This thing was a flagship phone not even 2 years ago. The micro SD card slot, fingerprint sensor on the back, dual camera setup, great screen, great cameras, like, and pretty good performance. There's really not too much to hate on this phone besides the software side of things. So I think that's pretty much my opinion on it. Like I said, if you want to pick it up, go ahead and check that first link down in the description. You can get it from Amazon for about $140, but that price tag may change in the time being. It might go higher, it might go lower, who knows. But if you have any questions or anything, let me know in the comment section as well. Hit that like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. Every single subscriber that we get really does count, so it'll mean so much if you guys can hit that. Also check out the other links down in the description as well. My Twitter, my Instagram, my second channel, all those links are linked down below. I'd really appreciate if you guys to check it out. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.